ever get that feeling, like you should be finding connection out there, like you should be finding your people, but something just doesn't click.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about your average, not my vibe feeling. I mean, like a much deeper disconnect.
Yeah.
And today we're going deep on something so important, especially for autistic folks, that complex relationship between finding your people, feeling like you belong, and the often overlooked impact of religious trauma.
Yeah, it's a conversation we don't have enough, honestly.
Really?
Because for many, those expectations of community, the should-be comforting part, can actually be the source of really deep hurt.
To give a bait and switch almost, right?
Yeah.
You're told these spaces should bring comfort, support.
Right.
But what if your experience is the complete opposite?
Exactly. And that's where we get into tricky territory. Because for autistic individuals, those social expectations that might seem, quote, normal in some settings, the cues, the rituals, the unspoken rules can be incredibly difficult to navigate.
It's like you're constantly on edge.
Yeah.
Trying to decipher this code you never got the handbook for.
Right.
And the article we read with that scene about the overwhelming lights and sounds.
Yes.
During a service, that really hit home for me.
Absolutely. That sensory piece is so crucial to understanding this.
Yeah.
For someone who's actually experienced that sensory overload during a service, combined with maybe some past trauma from similar environments, it's not just uncomfortable, it can be genuinely triggering.
Wow. Yeah. It's like, imagine trying to have this profound spiritual experience, but simultaneously feeling like your senses are under attack.
Right.
Not exactly a recipe for finding inner peace.
No, not at all.
And it's not just the sensory stuff.
Right.
The article also went into how the social dynamics of some religious communities can be really tough to navigate for neurodivergent folks.
It's a huge part of it, yeah.
We're
talking about the pressure to, make small talk. To engage in physical touch that might not be comfortable. Those unspoken rules you mentioned earlier. And these are often seen as like baseline expectations in these spaces. Which can be incredibly isolating for someone who processes social interaction differently.
Especially if you've already been made to feel other. For not quite fitting that mold.
Exactly.
Like this vicious cycle, you go seeking connection.
Yeah.
But the environment itself makes it hard to connect.
Right.
And you end up feeling even more isolated.
Exactly. And sadly, that isolation can contribute to what we call religious trauma.
And just to clarify for our listeners, we're not just talking about disagreeing with a particular belief system here.
Right. Exactly. Religious trauma runs much deeper. It's about the emotional and psychological harm that can come from negative experiences.
Within a religious context. Often compounded by the fact that those experiences might be misunderstood. Or invalidated by the community itself.
And for autistic individuals, those sensory and social differences we've been talking about are often at the heart of those negative experiences.
Exactly. Like you might stim in a way that helps you self-regulate. Which is a completely natural and healthy thing to do. But it's misinterpreted as being disrespectful or disruptive in that setting.
Oh, totally. Or you might miss certain social cues that everyone else seems to pick up on. Leading to misunderstandings or accusations of not being sincere. In your beliefs. Which can then lead to pressure to suppress or mask your autistic traits to try to fit in. Even though it's incredibly draining and unsustainable in the long run.
Absolutely. It's exhausting.
It's like trying to force yourself into a box that doesn't fit your shape. It's exhausting.
It is. So we've talked about the challenges, the potential for harm. But the article also pointed out how incredibly supportive religious communities can be. Particularly for neurodivergent folks. How do we reconcile those two things?
That's a great question. It comes down to intentionality.
Okay.
The article gave this one example of a church that started printing their programs on different colored paper.
Really?
Because they realized the bright white was actually painful for some members with sensory sensitivities.
Oh.
It's like such a small change. But it makes a world of difference.
It's like you said earlier, understanding that inclusivity isn't one size fits all. What feels welcoming to one person might be a nightmare for someone else.
Absolutely.
And that's where open communication is so crucial.
Communication is huge.
Yeah.
Communities need to create space for autistic individuals to articulate their needs, sensory, social, whatever they may be, and to be met with understanding rather than judgment. The article really stressed that.
Right. Instead of expecting autistic individuals to constantly explain themselves or mask their needs.
Yes.
Imagine if more communities took the initiative to educate themselves.
Yes.
About neurodiversity.
100%. And to understand that there's no right way to be autistic.
Right.
Just like any group of people, there's a huge spectrum of experiences and needs within the autistic community.
Right.
So it's about moving away from this idea of fitting in and toward a model of belonging that actually celebrates those differences.
I love that, yeah. Which brings us to a point that applies even outside of religious contexts, right?
100%, yeah.
This idea of fostering true belonging for neurodivergent people, it applies to any community.
Any community.
Schools, workplaces, social groups, you name it.
Absolutely. The principles are universal.
Yeah.
Empathy, understanding, and a willingness to adapt to meet the needs of all members. It's about recognizing that true belonging means being able to show up as your authentic self without fear of judgment or rejection.
So well said.
Yeah.
It really struck me when the article said inclusivity takes work.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to, like, slap a welcome sign on the door, right?
Yeah.
But it's the concrete actions that really make or break that sense of belonging.
It really is about walking the walk, you know? It's about being mindful of those subtle ways.
Yeah.
We might be excluding people without even realizing it.
Totally.
The language we use, the assumptions we make, even the physical environments we create. And then taking that next step to actively change those things.
Yeah, and, you know, for anyone listening who relates to this, who's felt that sting of not belonging, especially in spaces where you're told you should, I want you to know you're not alone.
Yeah.
Not by a long shot.
There are communities out there that will embrace your authentic self, neurodiversity and all.
Yeah, and what's even more powerful, you have the power to create those spaces yourself.
Absolutely.
You know what I love from the article? It talked about this one guy who started a social group specifically for autistic adults who had been hurt by their experiences.
Wow.
In traditional religious settings. It's like finding your people. Creating that sense of belonging that was missing before.
Exactly.
So empowering.
Totally. And on a more individual level, even just having those conversations with friends, family, coworkers about what inclusivity really means, how we can do better. That's huge. Because the more we break the silence around these issues, the less power they have to make people feel isolated and ashamed.
It's like, imagine a world where everyone feels empowered to say,
yes,
this is who I am. And I deserve to be welcomed and celebrated for it. That's the dream, right?
Absolutely. A world where differences are seen as strengths, not deficits, where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued for who they truly are.
And on that note, we always like to leave our listeners with something to chew on.
Love it.
So here's a question to ponder.
Okay.
What's one small but significant step you could take today in your own life, in your own community, to cultivate that sense of radical belonging?
That's a good one.
It might be starting a conversation, challenging an assumption, or maybe even just listening with a more open heart.
So important.
Whatever it looks like for you, take that step.
Yes, love that.
Thanks for diving deep with us.